How do we know how we should come to live our lives? That really is sort of at the heart of most people's questions. And I think if we look at the readings we have today, we're given clear instructions. And it starts with Abraham. Abram went as the Lord directed him. We each must come to recognize that fundamental truth and reality that God is directing us, just as he did Abram. He does show us the way. But we might ask ourselves, what exactly is God directing us to? And Paul tells us, he saved us and called us to a holy life. Each of us are called through our baptism to the universal call to holiness. Each of us are called, in essence, to reflect the presence of God in our lives, because that's all holiness is allowing God to be seen through you. And that is the direction that each and every Christian is called to follow. It really is that simple. But then we can ask ourselves, well, how do we know how to make God present, and how do we know how to show God in our lives? The gospel tells us today, as the Father speaks, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Listen to him. Essentially, if we want to know how to live that life of holiness, we have to listen to Jesus, because as he tells us, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. By no other name is one saved." It is by opening our hearts and our minds to the Lord and truly seeking to hear his counsel in our lives that we will find that direction of holiness. And he gives us the help to do that. We have prayer, we have scriptures, we have the teachings of the church, all of them intended to guide us to open our hearts, our ears to the Lord. But following Jesus and following that direction, that call to holiness, is not easy. And it can be something at times that can be frightening, because that call to holiness goes against everything that the world is calling us to. It directly contradicts what the teachings of our society, of our culture, tell us is the right to do. And so Jesus reminds us today, rise and do not be afraid. But how do we move past this fear? Again, Paul tells us, bear your share of hardship for the gospel with the strength that comes from God. It is natural to be afraid when we're called to do something that no one else is doing, to act in ways that are contrary to what most people think is right. But God will give us the grace to do just that, which will give us the strength not to be afraid. We are being directed in the way of life that we're called to, as clearly as Abram was that day. And ultimately, Lent is about helping us to hear the Lord's direction, so that through his grace we receive the strength necessary to lead a life of holiness by reflecting God's presence in our lives. That is what this season is about. May we truly open to it. May we truly seek to embrace our baptism and that universal call to holiness May we accept the grace that God desires to give us, that we can truly be strengthened and not be afraid.